Hello, everyone, and welcome to Critical Thinking Through English Composition. Today is our makeup lecture for May the 6th, 2025, and I would like to do two things in this lecture. First, I would like to talk about the midterm exam. I'll go through it section by section and show you what I expected for answers for the different questions. And then I will go on to today's lesson, which is to take a look at different common fallacies and help you prepare for the short quiz that we will be having near the end of our class on Thursday, May the 8th. So without any further delay, let's take a quick look at the midterm exam. So the very first part of the exam, general rules for short arguments. The most basic thing you have to do with any argument, whether you're listening to an argument or writing your own argument, is to be able to distinguish between the premises and conclusion. If you are making an argument, you have to make it absolutely clear what it is, the point that you're trying to make, and what your reasons are for that opinion. If you are reading an article or if you are listening to somebody's argument, you have to be able to understand what point they are trying to make, what is their conclusion, and what are their premises, what are the reasons for having that opinion. This is the absolute most basic building blocks for anything else in critical thinking, which is why I started the midterm exam with this question. So this is a quote from an article that I found on The Onion. For those who don't know, The Onion is a satirical online newspaper, which has articles that you should not actually take seriously because they are satire. There's usually some element of either social satire or political satire in most of their pieces. And in this one, it says, some people buy fake university degrees on the internet. They want to lie about going to college. But that's a waste of money, since it's easy to make a fake college diploma on your computer that looks just as real as a degree that you could buy on the internet. There is an issue in many countries about fake university degrees. It's possible to go online and find what are often called diploma mills, places, they're online schools where you don't even attend, and you essentially just pay money and they print up a diploma and send it to you. Now, this article says that some people buy these fake degrees, but it's a waste of money because, hey, it's easy to just do it by yourself on the computer. So why bother spending money on something that you can do by yourself for free? This is obviously highly sarcastic. Now, there is an argument being made here. Now, let's start with the conclusion. Most people got this question correct, but for the couple who didn't, let me help you out. The conclusion here is it is a waste of money. Some people buy fake degrees on the internet. Now, if you want to include that as a premise or just say, well, it's not actually a premise, it's just background information, that for me is not the key point here. The key point is it is easy to make fake diplomas on your computer that look just as real as a degree that you could buy on the internet. Therefore, it's a waste of money to do that. It's a waste of money to buy a fake degree on the internet if you could make a fake degree just as easily for free on your computer. Take a look at the indicator word here. The key indicator word is since. When you have a very simple premise and conclusion structure, with an indicator word like since, you can begin with since, and you know that a premise is going to follow that, then a comma, and then the conclusion. So since premise, comma, conclusion. And this is something that we took a look at in chapter 1, all the way back in chapter 1. So since it's easy to make a fake diploma on your computer that looks just as real as a degree that you could buy on the internet, that's the premise. It's a waste of money, meaning it buying a fake degree off the internet is a waste of money. Now, different students wrote this down in different ways, but if you had at least that as a premise, it's easy to make a fake diploma on your computer that looks just as real as a degree you could buy on the internet as a premise. The conclusion, it's a waste of money. And the indicator word, since. If you had that, you would get the 2 points for question 1. For question 2, natural order. Now, once again, this is something that we took a look at in our first couple of classes in the course. You start off by giving some background information, and then you tell us the topic, the issue, and you go on to the meat of the argument. Now here, we need to start off with some kind of background. Remember, assume that people don't know anything about the issue. So in this case, number 2 is the first part of the argument. A little bit of background information here. In 1908, something flattened 800 square miles of forest in a part of Siberia called Tunguska. I'm probably mispronouncing that. There are many theories about the Tunguska event. Some people say it was a UFO. Some even say it was an act of the god of thunder. By the way, some people say, that will obviously be the first one, and then some even say, making a more extreme comment, that it was an act of the god of thunder. Recently, however, scientists discovered that a lake in the area has the shape of an impact crater that would have been created by an asteroid or comet. So the Tunguska event was most likely caused by an asteroid or comet. And in this case, so is the indicator word indicating the conclusion that comes at the end of the argument. Here we are, question 3, unreliable, reliable premises. Most students did quite well on this question, but some didn't. So I'm going to spend a moment looking at this in a bit of detail. So premise 1, every time you eat meat, your meal is the result of the suffering and death of an animal. This is highly reliable. Let me explain. Every time you eat meat, it's undoubtedly the result of the death of an animal. You're not eating the animal while it's alive. So at the very least, every time you eat an animal, that is the result of the death of an animal. Now, as regards to the suffering, not every animal suffers when it is killed. I mean, maybe somebody goes out and shoots a deer, and then the deer is killed instantly, and then they clean the carcass and they prepare the meat themselves. Maybe somebody eats a chicken that was raised on in like a free range environment. But the vast majority of meat that people eat comes from factory farms, and it is it's very accepted that there is a lot of suffering that is involved in the raising of animals in factory farms. Industrial food production is not pretty, and I don't think that's a very controversial fact. So every time you eat meat, your meal is the result of the suffering and the death of an animal. This is obviously going to be a moral argument that the person is making. You should be a vegetarian because you don't want to be part of this suffering and death. It's immoral. It's unethical. Although there will be some cases where animals might not suffer before they are killed, the fact remains that it's highly acceptable to say that industrial food production or factory farms does include a degree of suffering for the animal. So I'd say it's quite a highly reliable premise there. Premise number 2, it's disgusting to put pieces of dead animal into your mouth and chew them. A lot of students pointed out that this is loaded language, which is something that we looked at also earlier in the course. And that's true. This is one of the reasons why this is a highly unreliable premise. It is to say that something is disgusting. For one thing, it's extremely subjective to say whether something is disgusting or not. What is disgusting to one person may not be disgusting to another person. but also to, yes, discussing to put pieces of a dead animal into your mouth and chew them. It's not only subjective, but it's using loaded language. And number three, one more reason to become a vegetarian is that you'd be joining a list of incredible people from Leonardo da Vinci, Isaac Newton, Thomas Edison, Paul McCartney, Fernando Vallejo. I may be mispronouncing that. Sorry. And Tobey Maguire. As many students pointed out, if these people are in fact vegetarians, the fact that they are vegetarian is not related to their greatness. Leonardo da Vinci is not regarded as great because he was vegetarian. Thomas Edison, everyone else on the list. Their greatness comes from some sort of professional work, and just by becoming a vegetarian will not make somebody great. Moving on to part two, arguments using examples. I tried to be very open-minded with these, but there were a couple of answers that I couldn't accept. Evaluating background rate. What information would you need to calculate the relevant background rates for the following environment? I realized after students wrote the test that not everyone might be familiar with scratch and win tickets, where not every winning ticket actually gives you a lot of money. Some tickets may only give you a $1 prize or a $2 prize. And perhaps there were some students that were not aware of that. So if you were able to say that, okay, every day 100,000 winning tickets are sold. We know that 100,000 winning tickets are sold. We don't know how much each winning ticket paid as a prize. Some tickets might have paid out $1. Other ones might have paid out hundreds of thousands or $1 million. We don't know. But if you pointed out we don't know how many tickets were sold overall, let's say, for example, 5 million, I don't know, let's say 5 million people. I know this is a very large number. I'll make it extra large to make my point. If 5 million tickets were sold every day, for example, from this store, that doesn't mean that 100,000 is a very high number. So you cannot say that it is that buying a Take 5 ticket gives you a good chance at winning too. Remember, 100,000 sounds like a very big number, but we don't know how many tickets are sold on a daily basis. And if you said that we don't know the total number of tickets sold, we only know the number of winning tickets, you automatically got your 2 points there. If you were able to point out that because it's a scratch and win lotto game, some tickets might only pay out a small amount of money, and maybe actually most of them probably only pay out a very small amount of money, and maybe just a very, very select few have a very large prize, then that was also an acceptable answer. Evaluating statistics. Yeah, beef is not high in cholesterol. The big problem here is there's no standard given for what constitutes high cholesterol. Also, there's not really much difference between 73 milligrams and 74 milligrams. Same thing with 90 milligrams. There doesn't seem to be a very significant difference between those amounts. But the most important thing here is, in order to determine if something is high in cholesterol or not, there has to be some kind of standard. If you're going to say 3 ounces, for example, how many milligrams of cholesterol in 3 ounces would be regarded as high cholesterol? Unless we actually know, unless we have some sort of standard, it would be impossible to say. And if you pointed that out, you would automatically get 2 points. Evaluating statistics. As always, I tried to be quite open-minded about the analogies, but some of the analogies that students made, it was really hard for me to give full marks because remember, an analogy is used to show similarity between two things in order to make some kind of point. Maybe you want to say that because two things are similar in one way, they will also be similar in another way. Or maybe you just want to show these two things that seem very different are actually similar in a relevantly similar way so that we can gain a new, fresh, or deeper understanding of one of them. But uh, trying to find a suitable romantic partner these days is like one student wrote, I think it was planning, was it planning a trip to another country, planning a vacation, which I thought was not the most relevantly similar. Once again, just because you can find some kind of similarity between two things does not mean that the relevant similarity is more significant than the relevant difference. You want to find two things which can be relevantly similar so that you're making a point. For example, deciding which political candidate to support often feels like there is one student in our class that chose this this example, and they said choosing or deciding which political candidate to support often feels like choosing a type of cheese, the type of cheese for their sub sandwich at Subway. And I thought this was a very interesting one because the student pointed out that although there are different colors of cheese, and different varieties of cheese and slightly different tastes, in the end, they're all cheese. Uh, and this is relevantly similar to political candidates in that although they may support different political ideologies or have different policy proposals, at the end of the day, they're all politicians and are therefore going to be more similar in ways, more similar than they are different. There's a very well-known analogy that I've heard used when people talk about the American political system. And when the presidential election comes, every time somebody says, in many ways, the candidates are like Coke and Pepsi, meaning that, yes, there are some small differences between Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola, but they're much more similar than they are different. And that's what you often get when there are two political candidates. It's a choice between Coke and Pepsi. And I thought that this student that said, if you're looking at the primaries and deciding which political candidate to support, they're all like just different varieties of cheese that you could put in a sandwich. And in the end, they don't taste that different and they're all cheese. I thought that was a very well-made analogy. Arguments about causes. Here, I just wanted you to show some kind of, at least three different types of causal relationships. So whether it's A causing B, B causing A, perhaps there's C that's causing A and B, or perhaps you could explain it as some kind of coincidence. That's what I was looking for. So for example, serving in the military during a time of war causes people to earn less money later in life than those who did not serve. Some people that said, well, perhaps if you're serving in the military in a time of war, perhaps it is either a physical injury or a mental trauma like PTSD, which will inhibit your ability to work or develop a career successfully after the war later in life. And that will result in you making less money than those who did not serve. Another argument that was put out was perhaps people that did not serve in the military in a time of war came from richer families that were able to use their social or political influence or their financial influence to make sure that their child did not serve in the military. And that actually was a factor that resulted in them making more money later on, the fact that they came from a rich background. And there are a couple of other ones that were quite well done as well. Teenagers' emotional well-being. One person, I think, wrote, perhaps it's eating with the family. The more often you eat with the family, the more you get to talk with them, and therefore that's going to result in greater emotional well-being and overall life satisfaction. Or maybe it's just that people who spend more time with their family are already uh, happier and more emotionally satisfied. Maybe people that are uh, um, emotionally satisfied or have very high levels of satisfaction in their life are just simply more likely to sit down with their family. Or perhaps it could be a coincidence. Maybe the teenagers are that have greater emotional well-being and overall life satisfaction. Maybe it's happening for reasons that have nothing to do with sitting down with their family more often during a week and having meals. Perhaps it has to do with the cycle of either the courses that they're taking at school, or maybe their social relationships are developing better. And the fact that it coincides with having more meals with their families is just a coincidence. Okay, in part 5, here we've got deductive arguments. This is where some people lost points. It was 4 points for this section. I've got the different deductive arguments here: modus ponens, modus tollens, hypothetical syllogism, disjunctive syllogism, and a dilemma. Let's take a look at the first one here. During the court trial of drug lord Joaquin Guzman, one witness claimed that Guzman had paid $100 million cash bribe to the president of Mexico. But to deliver such an enormous amount of money would have required a truck full of cash. And it's ridiculous to think that the president could have physically received that much money without noticing. Therefore, Guzman did not give the president a $100 million bribe. Now, in this case, the argument is using reductio ad absurdum. The person wants to argue that that Guzman did not give the president a $100 million bribe. How? Well, he says, listen, if he did give him $1 million bribe, then he would have had to put like $100 million into a big truck and then deliver it to the president, and then nobody would have noticed that. And that's ridiculous. So because it's so ridiculous, we can't accept it. Therefore, it's not true. Therefore, Guzman did not give the president a $100 million bribe. That's reductio ad absurdum. To prove P, assume the opposite, assume not P. Argue from that assumption that we would have to conclude Q. In that case, if he had given him a bribe, he would have needed to fill a truck with $100 million. But if he filled a truck with $100 million, somebody would have seen that. But nobody saw that, and it's ridiculous to assume that he could have done it, so therefore it didn't happen. Therefore, Q is false or absurd or ridiculous. I even put ridiculous here in the definition for reductio ad absurdum, because I thought somebody might notice that I have ridiculous here and also up here. The professor's giving a hint, and a hint it was. Number 2, the cat's name is Samantha Peterson. I know this because it turned to look at me when I shouted Samantha Peterson. If the cat turned to look at me when I shouted Samantha Peterson, then its name must be Samantha Peterson. Well, if the cat looks at me when I call Samantha Peterson, its name must be Samantha Peterson. It did look at me when I called Samantha Peterson. Therefore, its name is Samantha Peterson. That's modus ponens. Many medical texts suggest that the best way to treat bee stings is by scraping the stinger out without squeezing or pulling it. Some researchers once tested this by allowing honeybees to sting them repeatedly. They scraped some stingers out and pulled others out. They said that if scraping worked better than pulling, then scraping the stingers would leave a smaller welt. They found that scraping the stingers did not leave a smaller welt. Therefore, scraping the stingers did not work better than pulling them out. Okay, so they tried two different ways of removing. Oh, gosh, I would not like to take part in this experiment. Uh, if you've been stung by a bee, okay, either you can pull it out or you can scrape it out. Some medical books had said, if you scrape it out, then it will leave a smaller welt. A welt is like a red raised mark on your skin. So, uh, if uh, if scraping out a stinger is a better method, it will leave a smaller welt. But it didn't leave a smaller welt. Therefore, it's not a better method. This is modus tollens. The next one here, I'm offering you two pills, one red, one blue. You can take the red pill or the blue pill. Okay, so we've obviously got a choice here. Now, is this going to be a disjunctive syllogism or is this going to be a dilemma? I didn't choose the red pill, therefore I chose the blue pill. That would have been a disjunctive syllogism, but that's not what happens in this case. You need to choose. And once you choose, there's no turning back. If you take the blue pill, you will forget this ever happened and go back to living your life in blissful ignorance. If you take the red pill, you will be changed forever by what I show you. Thus, your choice is really between the life you know now, which is an illusion, and life as it really is, which is filled with danger. This is from The Matrix, which came out 25 or 26, oh my gosh, 26 years ago. Wow. This is a dilemma because the person is faced with a clear choice, either the red pill or the blue pill. And both choices have some kind of negative consequence. If they choose the blue pill, they will forget what's happened. So they'll forget meeting this person and they'll go back to their life of blissful ignorance. But that's the thing. The life that they will be living will be false. It will be an illusion. They will be turning their back on the truth. However, if they take the red pill, then they will be exposed to the truth, but they will realize that their life is actually full of danger because they will be forced to take some kind of action. So we've got a choice between A and B, and if the person chooses A, there's going to be some kind of negative consequence. And if they choose B, there's going to be a different but equally negative consequence. So ultimately, you are faced with a choice: the consequences of choosing A or the consequences of choosing B. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a dilemma. Okay, all right, so now that we've taken a look at the midterm exam, let's go on to our next lesson, which is going to be fallacies. In this case, I'll be looking at the fallacies in the back of the book. If I go to the back of the book, yeah, Appendix 1, some common fallacies. Just a quick note. There are more fallacies out there than the ones that are in the textbook. This is not an exhaustive list at all, but these are 10 very common fallacies that you can encounter in arguments. Not only the arguments that you can see, hear, and I guess otherwise experience in life, but also ones that you might find yourself making. These are ones that we should be very, very aware of when we are listening to other people's arguments and also making our own arguments. Also, towards the end of this lecture, I will be talking about how you can treat some of these fallacies. If you find yourself making a fallacy, sometimes you can actually fix it by tweaking it a little bit. Others, not so much. All right, so let me just quickly bring up my next presentation, and I'll go on to the meat of our lecture today. Here we go. Waiting for buffering. Okay, good. All right, so Let's start with the basics. When I talk about fallacies, what do I mean? I mean a mistaken belief, one that's made on a bad argument. Today, I'm going to give you 10 examples of bad arguments when somebody tries to make a point using faulty logic. I'll be talking about ad hominem, ad ignorantium, ad misericordum, ad populum, populum, affirming the consequent, denying the antecedent, equivocation, false dilemma, and also the straw man. So let's take a look at each of these in turn and also take a look at one or two examples of each type of fallacy. So the very first one here, ad hominem. This is Latin for against the person, and it's a personal attack. This occurs when somebody insults or denigrates the other person instead of attacking their argument. So just think of this way. Instead of attacking the argument that the person is making, you try to attack their credibility in some way. This might target something they've done in the past. It might target their motivation, their appearance, their characteristics. And this is often used when someone is not able to destroy someone's argument. They'll insult the person instead of actually trying to destroy their argument. If the person's argument is really strong, you'll find somebody else just saying, oh, well, you know, we can't trust this person because, et cetera, et cetera. They're not criticizing the argument, they're criticizing the person. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. If somebody says that vaccines are safer than the disease, you know, you should get a vaccine for either a particular virus or something that's out there. If somebody says that, rather than argue against the claim that vaccines are safer, somebody might just say, you're in bed with big pharma, meaning, you know, you are in cahoots with a big pharmaceutical company. Now, there might actually be an argument that the vaccine is not safer than the disease. There may be an argument for that. But in this case, if someone says you're in bed with big pharma, they're not even trying to attack the person's argument. They're just attacking the person. We shouldn't believe you because, you know, you're too close to the pharmaceutical industry. Or if a scientist said that you know, humans are causing climate change. This is a big one. You know, is climate change heavily influenced by people, or is it a natural process? If you say, well, scientists are in it for the money, in this case, you are attacking their motivation. Okay, you know what? You're not actually interested in trying to find out the root causes of climate change. You're just doing this in order to receive money, perhaps funding from the government or from special interest groups. Or if somebody says that GMOs, genetically modified organisms, are safe to eat, once again, somebody could say, you know, you're just a shill for Monsanto, meaning you are just like a spokesperson, or you are too closely connected to them. You have been bought by them. You're a Monsanto asset, something like that. Now, once again, there may be arguments for or against the safety of GMOs. I don't want to make it seem like I'm taking a stance on this one way or the other. For one reason, I think some GMOs might be perfectly safe to eat and other ones might not be so safe to eat. It's hard to generalize when you're talking about such a large variety of foods that have been modified. But if somebody says, we can't trust this person, or I don't believe that GMOs are safe because the person who said it, you know, they must be, you know, influenced by Monsanto. Maybe Monsanto is paying them to say this. What I'm actually doing is just attacking the person rather than their claim. The better thing to do would be to try and take a look at the GMOs that they're talking about specifically and see whether they are in fact safe to eat. That can't be true because you're an idiot. Yeah, perfect example of ad hominem. You will often get this, or if we say, yeah, anytime that a person makes an argument and someone else attacks their character or their past or makes a reference to their gender or some other characteristic instead of their argument, that is ad hominem. Next, we've got ad ignorantium, and this is also known as the argument from ignorance or the appeal to ignorance. And there's two different types of this. If you say that no one has been able to prove that something is false, therefore it might be true, and since we should keep an open mind about X, then we can conclude that X is probably true. That is ad ignorantium. But you could also do the opposite. No one has been able to prove that X is true. Therefore, it might be false. And since we should keep an open mind about it, we can conclude that it's probably false. It basically comes down to a lack of evidence. Nobody can say it's true. Nobody can prove it's true. Therefore, it must be false. Or nobody can prove it's false. Therefore, it must be true. These are both examples of ad ignorantium. You're basically saying we can't know, we're ignorant, therefore the opposite. If somebody wants to say, one of my old favorites here, the pyramids in Egypt, did ancient aliens help the ancient Egyptians build the pyramids? If someone told me that ancient aliens or aliens helped the ancient Egyptians build the pyramids, and I said, can you prove that's true? And they'll say, well, you can't prove it's false. And because you can't prove it's false, therefore we should be open-minded about it possibly being true. And then they sort of slide towards, well, therefore it is true. That would be an example of the argument from ignorance. Yeah, so here I've got it written again. There's no evidence that X happened. And because there's no evidence that it didn't happen either, yeah, you can't prove that someone's innocent, therefore they must be guilty. I'll be giving you a couple of examples about this, of that one in our class later on Thursday. Ad misericordium. This is the appeal to pity. This is when someone says, please give me special treatment, and then there's some sort of emotional cause. You should hire me because I really need money to feed my family, not because I'm the most experienced, not because I am the best qualified, but because I need money to feed my family. That's an argument for special treatment, an attempt to influence opinion through some kind of emotional plea. If someone comes up to me and says, please, Mr. Barnard, I can't get an F because I was sick the weekend before the exam, and also my dog died and I got into a car accident. These would be examples of misericordium. Whenever you are asking for special treatment and it's not for a related reason, but there's some emotional baggage connected to the reason, that's ad misericordium. Think of misery. If the person is using misery or suffering as their reason for expecting special treatment, that's what we call ad misericordium. Okay, moving on to the next one. Ad populum, okay? Everybody believes it, therefore it must be true. The mob mentality, declaring that a statement is true because a lot of people believe it. However, no evidence is offered to show that everybody is knowledgeable or reliable. It doesn't mean that everybody is ignorant, but there's no evidence offered to show that people are knowledgeable. So if I take a look at this one, yeah, most people think that Gatorade is better than Powerade. So Gatorade is the superior sports drink. We don't actually know whether most people are qualified to judge these two as to whether one is better than the other. But if you're saying everybody's talking about it, therefore it must be true, or everybody knows something, therefore it must be true, or nobody believes this, therefore it must be false. These are all examples of ad populum. And I've heard many examples of this in political discourse over the last several years. Okay, the bandwagon fallacy. It's also known as the bandwagon fallacy. And this is when, because many people believe it, therefore it must be true. Half of Americans believe in ghosts, so therefore they must be real. Or it must be a good book. It's on the bestseller list. The election was rigged. A lot of people are saying so. Millions use homeopathy. Had trouble with that one. It must work. All right, next, affirming the consequent. If P, then Q. Q is correct, therefore P is correct. This is a misuse of modus ponens. Okay, when roads are icy, the mail is delivered late. Okay, the mail was delivered late today, therefore the roads were icy. Actually, this is a logical fallacy. There are many other reasons why the mail could have been delivered late. Just because when the roads are icy, the mail is delivered late, that does not mean that when the mail is delivered late, that the roads were icy. Perhaps the mail person, mail staff, woke up late, or maybe it was rainy, or there could have been a million other reasons. It overlooks alternatives. You're affirming the consequent. In this case, consequent is the second part of the argument, the Q. If P, then Q. Just because Q is true doesn't mean that P is true. There could be other reasons. So this is a misuse of modus ponens. Yeah, if I'm a monkey, then I'm a mammal. Okay, I am a mammal. Therefore, I'm a monkey. No, this overlooks alternatives. If I'm a monkey, I am a mammal. Well, I am a mammal. That's true. But I'm not a monkey. I'm a human being. By making an argument like this, if P, then Q, Q, therefore P, this overlooks alternatives. By the way, I really want to go to Hokkaido one day and go in the hot springs with those snow monkeys. All right, next, denying the antecedents. This is a misuse of modus tollens. It's similar, but you'll see how it's different. If P, then Q, not P, therefore not Q. So when the roads are icy, the mail is late. The roads are not icy, therefore the mail is not late. Actually, although the mail would be late if the roads were icy, it may be late for other reasons too. This is very similar to confirming the consequent, but instead of saying the second part is true, therefore the first part is true, this is saying because the first part is not true, therefore the second part is not true. But the fact is there could be alternatives. There could be reasons why. When the roads are icy, the mail is late. Okay, the roads are not icy. Does that mean that the mail will not be late? Well, once again, there could be many reasons why the mail could be late, even though the roads are not icy. So just because P is false does not mean that Q is necessarily false either. Don't confuse this with modus tollens, which is saying if P is correct, then Q is correct. Q is not correct, therefore P is not correct. That's modus tollens. Don't confuse denying the antecedent with modus tollens. Yeah. If beer is free, then the students are happy. Beer is free, therefore students are not happy. No, there could be many reasons why the students are happy, even though the beer is not free. All right, this next one here, we've got equivocation. This is altering the meaning of a word in the middle of an argument. Actually, I'm going to change the definition of this a little bit. I'm going to give you two different types of equivocation. I'll talk about this one and then a slightly different type of equivocation in just a second. Yeah, this is altering the meaning of a word in the middle of an argument. So you start an argument using a particular word, and then you use the same word later in the argument but it has a significantly different meaning. Now, in this case, when you do that, it actually changes what you're trying to say. Let's take a look at the example. Men and women are physically and emotionally different. Okay, they're not equal, so the law should not pretend that they are equal either. Now, in this case, when the person says they're not equal, that means they're not exactly the same. Okay, men and women are physically and emotionally different. In the very first example of they're not equal, we're talking about equal in terms of similarity. However, when equal is used again later in the same argument, the law should not pretend that they are equal either. This has got to do with equal rights before the law, which is completely different from what was set up in the first part of the argument. If I actually say men and women are not identical, therefore they're not entitled to the same rights and opportunities, that would not make sense. And this is what happens with equivocation, where somebody uses the same word twice in an argument, and the word has a significantly different meaning in each case, and it's used to come to a conclusion that is not supported by the premises. So just because men and women are not physically and emotionally identical does not mean that they're not entitled to the same rights and opportunities. In this case, there is equivocation with the word equal. Equivocation can also be when a person uses two different words in an argument and pretends like they are the same meaning, and they're not. Okay. Fizzy drinks contain many calories. Yeah, calories are energy. Energetic people are healthy. Therefore, fizzy drinks are healthy drinks. Oh. In this case, energy and energetic. These are two words that have very different meanings. If somebody says, fizzy drinks contain many calories, okay, these calories are energy. Well, if you're very energetic, that means that you're healthy. Therefore, fizzy drinks are healthy drinks. They're sliding from one meaning of the word to another, and that is equivocation. Okay, so I'm going to go back here just for a second. So one more time, just to quickly review. If somebody makes an argument when they use the same word two times in the argument, let's say they use it in the premise and they use it in the conclusion, but the meaning is different. So the word is the same, but the actual intended meaning is different. That is equivocation. So by saying, okay, men and women are not equal, meaning they're not physically and emotionally identical, therefore the law should not pretend that they're equal either. This is arguing that men and women should not be treated the same way in the eyes of the law. However, if I take out the equivocation and I just say men and women are not identical, therefore they're not entitled to the same rights and opportunities, that doesn't actually make sense. And by removing the equivocation, you can clearly see how faulted or faulty the argument is. Okay, next, false dilemma. You might remember the disjunctive syllogism, it's either A or B. Okay, I don't choose A, therefore it must be B. A false dilemma is when people do this when there are actually many alternatives, but instead they reduce the options to two diametrically opposed sides. It overlooks any alternatives and it creates a dichotomy. It's either this or that. It's a dilemma that doesn't need to exist. It's either A or B. But in many cases, there are numerous other options. If you only say that it's, for example, You're either with us or you're with the terrorists. That's a false dilemma, because you don't, just because somebody does not support a particular government initiative does not necessarily mean that they are siding with the terrorists. This is a very classic case of a false dilemma, one which I remember seeing live on TV when I was a university student, all the way back in 2001, 2? All right. Yeah, I can either drop out of university or keep studying for a degree in psychology. This is a false dilemma. You might actually do something else. You might change your major. You could transfer to a different university. You could start working part-time and still go to school. Multiple options exist beside these two choices. If somebody ever takes a complicated situation and then breaks it down to two choices and completely ignoring other multiple options, that is a false dilemma. So here are some examples. If you're not a vegetarian, then you must hate animals. No, there are many other options. Just because someone is not a vegetarian doesn't mean that they hate animals. Either we ban all forms of AI or there will be no jobs left for people in the future. No, we might have many cases where AI is incorporated into jobs. There are many nuanced positions that we could have on this argument. If you want to do well in school, then you can't time with your friends. It's not an either or, like either you spend all of your time studying or you spend all of your time with friends. There can be a work-life balance. Either all countries only allow electric cars on the roads, or we face serious consequences from climate change. No, we'll experience serious consequences from climate change anyway. All right, next, the straw man argument. This is when you take somebody's argument and you caricature it. You create a false or distorted version of their argument, and then you pretend that is that person's argument. And this is called a straw man, because a straw man cannot fight back. You know, if you think of a scarecrow, if you insult a scarecrow or if you punch a scarecrow, the scarecrow cannot punch you back. A scarecrow is not a real person. The straw man fallacy is when you take somebody's argument and then you distort it so that it's not actually the argument that person was making. You have created a false argument, just like a scarecrow is a false person. So let's take a look. Yeah, if someone says, we should eat less beef, you know, raising cows requires a lot of water and land and emits a lot of carbon. If someone then says, you want everyone to be a vegetarian, then this is a straw man argument. The first person did not actually say that everyone should be a vegetarian. They just said that we should eat less meat or less beef because it's very resource intensive. It requires a lot of land, also requires a lot of water, and it results in a lot of carbon emissions. These are serious considerations. They're not arguing that everybody should be a vegetarian. One of the telltale signs that someone is making a straw man argument, and you can see this in many debate style arguments, is when a person makes an argument, they say something, and then the other person says, so what you're saying is, and then they proceed to reword the person's argument in a way that distorts or creates a false impression of the first person's argument. That is a straw man. So if you ever see an interview or a debate and one person says, so what you're actually saying is, and then they create an argument which is not actually what the other person was trying to prove, ladies and gentlemen, you have encountered the straw man. Okay, the school lunch budget must be examined to cut out waste. So in this case, the person just wants to take a look at the money that is allocated for school lunches and make sure it is as efficient as possible. But then somebody says, hey, this guy wants to starve our children. because they were thinking that, okay, by cutting out waste from the lunch, the school lunch budget does not mean that they're going to cut the school lunch program and therefore starve the children. This person has taken the argument and created a twisted, distorted version of it. And that is the straw man. It's one of the easier fallacies to recognize. Okay, so the straw man example. Yeah, I think that people should not go to jail for nonviolent drug crimes. Good example here. If someone says, so what you're saying is you think evil drug dealers should be free to sell drugs to children and not be punished, right? What the second person has said is clearly a distortion of what the first person was arguing. The first person was arguing that if somebody is guilty of a drug crime, but a non-violent drug crime, so for example, perhaps they were caught smoking drugs, smoking an illegal drug, consuming an illegal drug, or perhaps selling a small amount of an illegal drug, that person should not go to jail. That is very different from arguing that drug dealers should be free to sell drugs to children. The very first argument said nothing about the ability to sell drugs without punishment, and it certainly didn't state either explicitly or implicitly that that drug dealers should be able to sell drugs to children. Yeah, this is an example of the straw man. Okay. All right. So now we've taken a look at 10 different fallacies. Let's take a look at how you can fix some fallacious arguments. If you notice that your argument has a particular fallacy in it, you don't need to throw out the whole argument. You might be able to fix it. Fallacious arguments can often be fixed if you add more premises, if you emphasize the legitimate point in the argument, and if there's any loaded language in your argument, cut it out. So let's take a look. Ad hominem. Okay. Remember, the ad hominem argument or the ad hominem fallacy is when you attack the person instead of criticizing their argument. Well, stop attacking the person and look at their argument. Perhaps there actually is a legitimate criticism you can make about their argument. So if two people are having a debate about immigration, and one person just says, you're a racist, and you're a racist, or you're a something phobe, is an ad hominem attack that I've heard many times in various debates and arguments over the last 5 or 10 years. In this case, the person may actually be a racist. They may not be a racist. That's not material in this case. The point is, if a person has said a statement that you disagree with, rather than just using a slur, S-L-U-R, basically an insult to discredit the person, actually point out the premises in the person's argument that are false. If the person is making a racist argument that is based on false premises, then point out those errors, point out the negative stereotypes, point out how they're overgeneralizing. Criticize the claim and not the person making the claim. This is the difference between analyzing an argument and just insulting somebody. Next, ad ignorantium. Remember, this is when if somebody says something must be false because we can't prove it's true, or something must be true because we can't prove that it's false. You might want to add an additional premise. Maybe the fact that there is no evidence does really support the argument that something is false. Just because there's no evidence obviously doesn't mean that something has to be false, but maybe the fact that there's no evidence actually is a very strong argument that it is false. You might want to explain why a lack of evidence can count as a good reason to believe that something is false. Let's take a look at the Loch Ness Monster as an example. Okay, so this is the famous picture of the Loch Ness Monster, a dinosaur-like creature that is believed by some people to live in a lake in Scotland. Now, some people say, okay, the Loch Ness Monster, it must be a legend. It can't be real because there's no evidence. There's no evidence, therefore, the idea that the Loch Ness Monster is real must be false. That by itself would be the ad ignorantium fallacy. However, let's add in a couple of premises. The lake has been scanned using high-tech equipment. So it has been scanned and there's nothing there. There have been countless searches for the Loch Ness Monster over the years. People have been looking for this monster forever. The famous photo that we see here on the PowerPoint is almost certainly fake. And also, I'd say, given the fact that we're now in the era of smartphones where everybody is walking around with a camera on their phone, the idea that no one has been able to capture a even halfway decent picture of the Loch Ness Monster till now, this makes it highly unlikely that the Loch Ness Monster does exist. The lake's been scanned. There have been countless searches over the years. The famous photo is fake. Everybody is walking around carrying a camera, including the millions of tourists that visit Loch Ness every year. And there have been no documented pictures since then. There's really no evidence of a large dinosaur-like creature in the lake, despite all of the previous premises. In this case, the lack of evidence really does create a good reason for believing the claim is false. Next up, ad misericordiam. Oh yeah, asking for special treatment because of suffering or hardship. Now, sometimes somebody's suffering or hardship could be a legitimate reason. And this is sometimes given this is sometimes brought up in cases where a person who has undergone a lot of trauma and then committed a crime, the fact that they were suffering from trauma is used to negate some or all of the responsibility for the crime. In this case, focusing on the legitimate reasons, how the trauma could have influenced the person's behavior, that is showing how the person might deserve special treatment, rather than just saying, listen, this person suffered something, therefore they deserve the special treatment. You have to focus on the legitimate reasons that the hardship deserves special treatment, not just the hardship itself. Ad populum. This is a really good one here when you have a group of people that may actually be an authority. Remember, ad populum is when you say everybody believes A, therefore it must be true, or nobody believes A, therefore it must be false. In some cases, if you have a group of people that believe or don't believe something, those people might actually be an authority. Now, rather than just using ad populum, try to point out why it's reasonable to accept what everyone else is saying. For this example, I want to give a reference to a very old movie called 12 Angry Men. And if you haven't seen the movie 12 Angry Men, let me give you a brief synopsis. 12 Angry Men is about a murder trial involving a young man who killed an older man in this poor neighborhood in a big city. And it looks like an open and shut case. There's a lot of evidence pointing toward the young man being guilty of this crime. At the beginning of the movie, the judge says, okay, the jury, Jury, the jury will now go into this room and discuss the case and come to a verdict. They will decide innocent or guilty. And so the 12 men go into the room and begin talking about it. And at this is still early in the film, 11 of the men say that the young guy must be guilty. Oh, look at all the evidence. He must be guilty. And they take a vote. Guilty, 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 not guilty. There's one man who says, I just don't think that this guy is the killer. Now, what happens at that moment? Let's take a look. This is where somebody uses the ad populum fallacy. You've got these men here, and because it's the 1950s, they're all white, and they're all men, they're all smoking. And in this case, someone says, listen, why do you think that this young man is innocent? Everybody else here thinks that he's guilty. You're the only one that thinks he's innocent. So he must be guilty. Everybody else believes that he's the killer. Therefore, he must be guilty. Okay, here's the exact quote. Yeah. Here's the interpretation. Rather than just saying, okay, because everybody believes he's guilty except for you, you must be wrong because you're the minority. Everyone else says that he's guilty, therefore we must be right. You might point out that everybody has the same information. You don't know anything else that no one else knows. We've all looked at the same evidence and we've all come to the same conclusion. In this case, I think it's reasonable to believe that you've made some kind of mistake. In this case, rather than just saying everybody believes A, therefore it must be true, the one person who doesn't believe it must be wrong. If you point out that everybody has heard the same evidence, 11 people were convinced, and this other person doesn't have any other information that could possibly influence their opinion, they've all heard the same evidence, either one person has made a mistake or 11 people have made a mistake. And it's more likely that one person made a mistake rather than all 11. So it's reasonable to believe that you've made some kind of mistake. By the way, if you haven't seen 12 Angry Men, it is a masterclass in script writing. If you want to know how to write effective dialogue, how to show characterization and build tension within a very limited amount of space, 99% of the movie is in like a single room. It's just 12 guys sitting around talking. It is very, very well structured and very, very well written. You can try to find it on some streaming service or maybe another source. Equivocation. Now, if somebody is guilty of equivocation, this is very, very easy, very, very difficult to fix. Because usually once you remove the equivocation, there's no connection between the premise and the conclusion, and the argument just falls apart. I wasn't able to find any examples of removing equivocation and being able to fix it. I would say equivocation, 99% of the time, you can't fix it. If somebody can give me an example of using equivocation in an argument, this is where you have either one word with two meanings that is used in very different contexts in the premise and the conclusion, or two words that the writer or the speaker pretends have the same meaning, but they don't. Once you actually remove the equivocation, it's very, very hard to try and actually create a cohesive argument. Okay. So in just a moment, I'm going to be talking about our homework assignment. Okay, great. So just to quickly wrap up, so far today, I have talked about 10 different logical fallacies, all of which you can find in the back of the book in Appendix 1. When we have our class on Thursday, May the 8th, here's what I'm going to be doing. First, I'm going to review all of these 10 logical fallacies. I will give you examples. We'll have a little quiz show. First, I'll go through all of them one by one. I'll explain them. And then I'm going to give you 10 examples. We'll do a little group game show, and you'll try to identify which one each argument is using. Then I'm going to give each group a different logical fallacy, and you will have to create an example and then show them to the class. So I will review it, then I'll give you examples, then students will make their own examples and share them with the class. And then towards the end of class, I'm going to give a 5-point logical fallacy quiz, where I will give 5 different logical fallacies, and you will be able to, in just a few minutes, read them and then identify which logical fallacy is being used in each argument. If we have time, what I'd also like to do is show you how to write a paragraph where you take a look at a particular logical fallacy, dissect it, and then show how it is misrepresenting a particular argument. That will all be on Thursday, May the 8th. Thank you very much for enjoying this makeup lecture. I will see everybody next week. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye. Oh, and if you have any questions between now and our next class, please just post the questions in the group chat on Kakao Work. Thank you very much.